It is here, on this beautiful trail along the Boulder Creek in Colorado in 1954, that Jane Doe's body was discovered. Body beaten and nude with only a few bobby pins left in her hair, decomposing and unidentifiable, she was a mystery to those working on her case. With little to no evidence of who she was and who killed her, she remained a Jane Doe with an unanswered story. She continued to be a mystery for 55 long years until a civilian, Sylvia Pettum, stumbled upon the case and decided that a name should be put to the grave. She worked with Detective Steve Ainsworth to solve this mystery. With the public's input and the use of forensic science, Pettum connected both the identity of Jane Doe to be Dorothy Gay Howard and her murderer to be Harvey Glatman. Glatman had already been executed in 1959 for other murders, yet Dorothy's case remains open. The question is, how and why is her case still open? How did forensic science play a role? Sylvia, a common citizen, was crucial to Jane Doe's case. Pettum's journey with Jane Doe has been encapsulated in her book, Someone's Daughter. Although her book contained much information, there were a few unanswered questions. Miss Pettum agreed to answer some of these questions in an email interview regarding her work in the case. Here, she described her involvement. Pettum first entailed her interest in the case. She stated that when walking through the Columbia Cemetery in 1998, she noticed a Jane Doe gravestone, which said that the deceased was about 20 years old, which was very close to the ages of her two daughters. That was enough to inspire her to get involved. She then went to the library and began to read old newspapers in hopes of finding more information. She goes on to talk about how she started a website with a message board in hopes that someone could provide more possibilities. The website was active for 11 years before a woman by the name of Michelle Fowler stumbled upon Pettum's forum and said that her great-aunt Dorothy Gay Howard could be Jane Doe's true identity. Miss Fowler was able to finally start the journey to piece together her aunt's story. Dorothy had run away from her home in Phoenix, Arizona in 1954, and they had always suspected that she was going to her aunt's house in Colorado, but she never made it there and has been missing ever since. With this information combined with the recent growth in forensic science knowledge, the police felt confident in exhuming Jane Doe's body to take a DNA profile of her dental remains and compare it with the DNA from a cheek swab from Dorothy Howard's sister. Here is a professional to talk more on how forensic science works from a scientific point of view.
So with a cheek swab, what they're looking for is the isolation of DNA. With that DNA, then they can make matches based on various techniques to get kind of like a pattern.
Science, Dorothy's case would still be unsolved and her grave would still be marked as a Jane Doe. But by using her DNA sequence from her sample and comparing it to Dorothy's sister, they were able to identify her. They had enough similarities in the DNA to prove that they are related, and without this new technology, Dorothy may have never been identified. Along with the identification of Dorothy using forensic science, they were also able to prove many possible theories as to how she died. This incredible discovery was extremely important not only within the case, but also for the personal family of Dorothy to have some closure. But the use of forensic science was also useful to the Boulder County Police Department, because it was able to prove that the changes in forensic science made it possible to solve cases that are over 50 years old, and there can be closure for more of these Jane Doe victims' families and cases. The importance of being able to not only identify who these Jane Does were, but also what happened to their bodies is extremely important in identifying what their cause of death was, and also who could have been linked to the crime due to these trends. The identification of Dorothy Gay Howard was a huge victory for the case. However, the questions revolving her death only seemed to grow. Why was she here? Who could have killed her? How did this happen? Sylvia had many suspicions as to who could have been the person who caused Dorothy's tragic death, but one cruel man matched this description of how the murder occurred and was in the right place to have committed this crime as well. This man was Harvey Glatman. Glatman was executed for his crimes in 1959 after being given the name the Lonely Hearts Killer, because he was known for contacting models from the site Lonely Hearts and taking pictures of them before they were murdered. He was known to tell models that they were part of a special shoot which required them to be bound with rope. They would willingly be tied and photographed before Glatman showed his true colors. When forensic scientists took a look at Dorothy's body, there appeared to be multiple injuries to the ligaments, which matched very closely with the known victims. With other evidence on the body, scientists were able to find that the injuries on her remains looked as though she had been hit by a car. They were also able to compare these to a car like the one that Glatman owned. It is believed that with this evidence, Dorothy was killed when the bumper of Glatman's car hit her. They called this the bumper theory. This was ascertained through thorough work from both the detectives and forensic scientists on the case. Here is a former police officer to further explain the process of a police officer in a murder.
When a crime is discovered, the first thing always is safety. Then you move on to protecting the crime scene. And you would cordon off an area that is much larger than what you think is. One of the ways to close a criminal case is exceptionally cleared category. One of the ways you can do that is death of a suspect. So what you would have to prove, a detective would have to be able to say, here's the evidence that absolutely clearly shows that this particular suspect committed the crime and that suspect is now dead. If you could establish that, then you could close the case as exceptionally clear. New evidence, those cases don't get worked hardly at all. I doubt that there's going to be new evidence that comes up. If evidence was preserved back in the 50s, so modern day we would videotape that entire scene very methodically from different angles, so that if we need to go back and look at something, most departments have a cold case unit, which evidence can be anything, and so it can be extremely difficult because of the amount of time. Certainly the longer amount of time that goes on, the harder it is to close.
While in court, Glatman never directly confessed to this particular murder. However, when asked if any models that he hired in Denver were still alive, Glatman simply said, unless they've been run over. Since Glatman was executed in 1959, he could not be tried for Dorothy's murder. Even though the evidence suggests that it was him, her case still remains open, meaning that her case is in active investigation and is part of a current caseload for a department or officer. As Officer Turner said, since the case is so old, there are many possible reasons as to why it is still open, including the lack of evidence, the difficulties in proving any new suspects, and the substantial amount of work that goes into proving any new information. So while there is a great possible explanation as to how Dorothy was murdered, the case still remains open. Without the help of a common citizen in forensic science, a virtually hopeless Jane Doe case would have never revealed itself to be a tragic explanation for a missing family member and the possible first murder of a twisted serial killer. With the recent breakthroughs in science and advancements in police procedure, the way that murders are investigated have changed. This case broke barriers by helping prove that such an old case like Dorothy's could be solved years later using new and improved methods of forensic science.